Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another Arkan's Alternatives, talking about Helldivers 2 weaponry. We're finishing off the small arms today with grenades, fire weapons, explosive weapons, and all kinds of unique options. Let's get right into it as we have a lot to go over with this kind of miscellaneous video. The first one is one that I'm sure a lot of people have been wanting me to talk about because it's kind of one of, if not the most controversial pick amongst all of the Helldivers options, and that is the Flam or Flame 66 Torture. Now, the Torture is a remarkable option, I would say. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just kind of niche, or interesting is a better way of saying it. For being a flamethrower, which it is a flamethrower, it's remarkably versatile. It has AP 3/4. Again, I say 3/4 because, like all flame weapons, you kind of have to direct impact targets to really do damage to armored enemies. It doesn't really do as much DOT with enemies if they step on it, but it has that DOT, so even against armored enemies it can affect them. But unlike the other flame weapons, it has a lot of ammunition. Essentially, over the flamethrower support weapon, it has less ammo per magazine, but 2 more magazines. And as far as ammo economy goes, if you use it efficiently, aka if you fire at the ground, you effectively use it to hose down light enemies, and you use it to stun larger enemies, it actually has a pretty decent amount of ammo as far as ammo economy goes. So I really don't hate it as much as I dislike a lot of fire weapons. You know, the pistol I wasn't a big fan of because of low ammo capacity. The flame weapon, the actual support one, I'm not a huge fan of because, well, the flam exists, and also because, it has some issues of its own as far as like a startup time goes. And while the torture does have that, as a primary weapon, its only real issue, in my opinion, is that flame problem. Either it can take a short amount of time to set up the pilot light. Again, with the heavy weapon, that's more of an issue because you're not just carrying around the heavy weapon all the time. With the torture, on the other hand, you are carrying around. It is your primary. So you can keep the pilot light lit all the time. Not as much of an issue. The bigger issue comes down to stopping power, stun and stumble power, and of course, lighting yourself on fire. I have a very unfortunate habit of lighting myself on fire with flame weapons, so I tend to go away from this thing, but against bugs, this is absolutely indispensable. I see a lot of people using this weapon, and while I would really take it because it can penetrate light armor, or I can penetrate medium armor, and also because I can cause some ground fire, it does have some limitations to range. It's a little bit shorter range than the actual flamethrower, but other than that, I'm a really big fan of the torture overall. I just wouldn't use it myself because I am not a bug diver. If I was a bug diver, this would probably want to be in one of my primary weapons. The next one up is a little bit of a silly one. The Jar 5 Dominator. The Jar 5 Dominator is weird. It's this white one under here. It's got kind of an octagonal, large magazine, and it fires 15 by 100 millimeter rocket projectile shells. Essentially, very large caliber anti-materiel rocket propelled rounds. It has 15 rounds per magazine and 6 spare magazines with an AP of 3. Now, the Jar Dominator, with how it is, you would expect these to be explosive rounds, but they're not. They're pretty much purely kinetic rounds, and they really work best against enemies that are large and bulky and well armored. For that reason, it's pretty effective against the bots. And its kind of cousin, the Eruptor, is much better against the bugs, so they kind of work in tandem. The Jar 5 Dominator has never been a thing that I was a huge fan of for 2 reasons. One, it has significant recoil, and especially if you get shot, it's very hard to get this weapon back on target because of its size. Furthermore, while it has decent accuracy, it has a very slow rate of fire, so if there are multiple armored enemies, the Jar 5 has a little bit of a difficulty hitting them, and of course, with that only 15 rounds per magazine, yeah, it has difficulty with ammo economy, and what is even more important, if you miss rounds, it punishes you a bit more than other weapons would. So I definitely understand why people use it, especially against the Illuminate or against the bots. But against the bugs, I think the Jar 5 is just doesn't have enough ammo to really deal with them. It's too limited, and it doesn't have the explosives that the R36 Eruptor has. So it's a good weapon, very effective. You can almost use it like a bolt gun from 40k. But the Eruptor is a much more silly weapon. It really hits me as like a max meme gun. The Eruptor, or the R36 Eruptor, is a fragmentation high explosive 20 millimeter bolt action grenade launcher, essentially. So, like I said, this is a silly weapon. It's got a very far forward bolt, so you essentially pull up and shoot once each round. It has a pretty small ammunition capacity. If I remember right, it's like 6 or 7, maybe 5 shots per magazine. So it's a lot less ammo per mag than the Jar 5, but it also is way more damage, being 20 millimeter fragmentation rounds. So you can really treat this like a grenade launcher. Problem, it tends to kill you, and even though it has AP3, it's very finicky when it comes to what it can actually do damage to, because these are grenades and they do require either direct impact or more likely impact with the ground in order to do a lot of damage. For that reason, I usually say to bring the Eruptor against bugs. Why is that? While it might work against the Illuminate, I think that it lacks rate of fire dramatically, and, rate of fire is usually a good thing against bugs, but in the fact that it has high explosive damage and some decent armor penetration, and the fragmentation acts as its own kind of projectiles that can hit more targets. You can essentially blast 1 or 2 enemies, or shoot underneath or in the middle of a group of enemies, and kill multiple at a time. Now, myself personally, I don't have the patience for the Eruptor. I don't have the kind of wherewithal or the nerves of steel that's required to stand in front of a bunch of enemies and shoot them with this weapon kind of consistently over time. But ever since the buff that made it a little bit more reasonable to bring the Eruptor into combat, it's become pretty good against the bugs, and I've seen people use it against bots in some cases, especially at long ranges. But myself personally, I'm not a huge fan of that. I think there are better weapons for bots. But if I was to choose on a bug mission between the Eruptor and the Dominator, I would take the Eruptor. The next one up is another great bug weapon, the CB9 Exploding Crossbow, which is a very funny kind of multi-shot one-handed crossbow. A pretty cool weapon all in all. It has 8 5-round magazines or charges. The explosives are good for bug holes, and it is armor penetration 3. So firing the exploding crossbow, I often see people using this almost like a primary in many cases. They're kind of running around with it as their main weapon that they use, even though it's a one-hander. But I think it has 2 massive advantages. One, it has explosive fire and AP3, so it can kill those kind of bigger, tougher enemies that are common in the bug lineup. But also, it's relatively accurate, and with the advantage that it can destroy bug holes. So I've seen people go through entire nests and just blow them up with the exploding crossbow, and because it doesn't have to reload after every single shot like the Eruptor, or because it actually has explosive, unlike the Dominator, I almost think that this is a good hybrid between the two. You have the multiple rounds and the decent ammo economy of the Dominator, but you also have the explosive capabilities and the armor penetration of the Eruptor. I mean, the Dominator also has AP3, but, less rounds and no explosive. So it's a little bit of a cross between the two. And has some unique advantages that I think makes a lot of bug divers like it more than the kind of traditional grenade launcher secondary, especially because that takes up a stratagem slot. And by the way, because some people were asking, we will be doing stratagems in this series, so don't worry, those are coming next. The next one up is a pistol that I've seen kind of fall out of usage, or at least I've never seen anyone use it very consistently, and that is the P11 Stim pistol. It is a revolver with a total of 30 rounds, and it heals you with amphetamines from afar. Now, I think the big issue with the Stim pistol is it's hard to know when to use it, and it has shoddy accuracy overall. You can't really shoot yourself with it, and shooting allies, it's hard to tell when they're injured. So it would work best in a team where you're able to talk to each other on comms and be like, I'm out of stims, or I'm wounded, I need help, I'm crippled. Or if you see an ally who gets thrown away, but if you're in that kind of thick of the fight moment, I don't see the stim pistol being all that useful to you because you're gonna have to stand stand your ground and actually fight whatever just beat the hell out of your friend. So I think this could be reworked a couple of ways. My number one would be have it poison enemies. So essentially, it'll make them go berserk or crazy, which is helpful. It would only affect things with no armor, so you could do it to warriors or things of that nature, or maybe a couple of shots could do it to like a bile spitter or something like that. That would be a good idea in my opinion, kind of like the sterilizer where it makes them go crazy, or the various gas weapons. But as it is, I think it has some limitations as a healing weapon in the Helldiver's arsenal. There are definitely people who are going to disagree with me on that, and that's okay. We can disagree, but I don't like it very much. The next one up is the GP31 grenade pistol. It is essentially a 7-round swing-loading grenade pistol. It has pretty similar stats to most of the grenades that we're going to go over. Kind of medium penetration, decent damage, decent destructive capability. It is very similar to the grenade launcher stratagem, and matter of fact, as a secondary weapon, it's probably a replacement for that. But, if you were to compare it with something like the exploding crossbow, I think they have different purposes. The grenade pistol does more damage, but it has significantly less ammunition. So I think you could argue it either way. If you wanted to have a more consistent primary than the exploding crossbow, like you wanted a nice AP3 primary like the Liberator Penetrator, or a plasma weapon or a shotgun, I could see the grenade pistol being a nice backup so that you can close bug holes, destroy Illuminate ships, and blow up various factories for the bots. Last one. The GP31 Ultimatum. God's chosen weapon. Lethal against all foes. The mini nuke on a stick. My primary secondary weapon. This is my choice of weapon. And again, people are going to be mad at me. Meta pick here. But the Ultimatum is so good. It's so powerful. If you bring some extra ammo, 2 to 3 shots with the Ultimatum per loadout, basically. Yeah, it is a guaranteed kill on almost every tank. It's a guaranteed kill on Bile Titans if you hit them directly. It's a guaranteed kill on Chargers if you hit them directly. It's a guaranteed kill on every single bot tank. It significantly damages factory striders. It can obliterate stratagem jammers. It is one of the most powerful and versatile secondary weapons in the game, bar none. And it is my absolute favorite. I think now, with all of these videos, you guys are kind of figuring out what my loadout is. I have that cinder block armor for the extra ammo. I take the GP31 Ultimatum for my anti-tank options, and then I bring the Plas1 Scorcher as my primary. So, yeah, the GP31 is one of the best possible options in the game. And honestly, I think it works best against the bots, considering the amount of tanks and fortifications and hulks that you see in the game. The Ultimatum can just deal with every single one of them in one shot without much difficulty. It has very short range, but once you master that kind of arc distance, and it's not that hard, you can basically guarantee an instantaneous kill on every single tank that the bots have to offer, except for the Factory Strider. So, against which enemies would you use these weapons? Against the bots, I think the best possible option is the GP31 Ultimatum. I really can't justify any other weapon being as good. The GP31 is super powerful, useful against all of the armored enemies. It's a great secondary backup if you don't want to bring an anti-tank weapon. And I think that's how it should primarily be used, essentially as a replacement for an anti-tank stratagem. Now, naturally, you're going to want to bring other stratagems that help you defeat the bots, maybe a personal shield, something like that, a personal shield, and then you pick up a light machine gun from a friend or an EAT even, so that you can knock out 2 or 3 tanks at a time. That's perfect. But for myself personally, I really can't do bot missions where I run into a lot of tanks, at difficulties level 8 and above without the ultimatum, because it's just so effective at identifying a target, instantly killing it. Against the bugs, I think the Torture, the Flam 66, is your best option. Now, while the Dominator and the Exploding Crossbow are great and all, I really think that the Flam has that absolute advantage of fire and the armor penetration and the DOT to match. Now, it doesn't stun as much as the exploding crossbow, but it also fires faster than the exploding crossbow, and it fires faster than almost every other weapon on this list. So, honestly, I think that's probably your best bet, with a close runner-up being the exploding crossbow, just for that ability to take out bug nests. Against the Illuminate, I really can't recommend any of these, sadly enough. I know, it's unfortunate to say. The Ultimatum has its upsides and its downsides. It's overkill against almost every single Illuminate creature, and it's very difficult to knock down the Striders or the big tripods with the Ultimatum. But it takes out all of their ships in one shot. So, not bad, but there's usually a lot of Illuminate ships, and you're going to run out of ultimatum ammo before they run out of ships. So, against the Illuminate, I don't think any of these are a good pick. The Jar 5 Dominator, maybe, but it doesn't have the explosive to deal with the Voteless. The Eruptor, kind of, but it's way, way, way too slow to deal with the Voteless. There's too many of them. The Torture, it doesn't have the range to deal with any of the Overseers whatsoever, and you're completely useless against the Flying Overseers. So, sorry about that, I just knocked my mic. So, I can't recommend any of these against the Illuminate, but I will say I am testing out the GP31 grenade pistol against them, and perhaps that will be more useful. So maybe experiment with that, but outside of that, caveat, I don't think any of these are very, very good against the Illuminate. I might be wrong. I haven't used every single one of them extensively, so yeah. On to the much longer and a little bit more memey list of grenades. And throwables, but mostly grenades. The first one is the TED-63 Dynamite, and this came out in the kind of Western-themed Warbond. The TED-63 is a six-pack of dynamite. It's essentially TNT. It is AP3, and it does an insane amount of damage. However, the real advantage of the dynamite is the fact that it has a variable timer. You can set it for basically like a minute, half a minute, or like 5 seconds. And it has a massive radius of damage. It's pretty effective at clearing out crowds, but I think the real reason why you would use the TED, other than just to lay like traps and mines on defensive missions, would be to blow up large areas like gunship manufactories and things of that type, because you can essentially run through or jetpack through, drop them in the middle, and then knock out 4 separate gunships by themselves while they're on the ground. It's also pretty useful at getting rid of hulks because hulks are relatively slow. And if you drop it, like a landmine, the hulk will likely run over it and then it will be able to cripple them, which is pretty effective considering how much damage it does. The next one is another one of the standards, the GP10 Incendiary, and I love the design for this. It has these little flare sticks, it has kind of the Coke can top that a lot of technical grenades have. Very similar, its cousin, the G13 Incendiary Impact, what I like to call the problem solver. These ones are basically designed just for anti-infantry, and really they're designed as fire weapons. Do they work well against all factions? Not as well as the TED-63 in terms of like every single faction, but against bugs and against the voteless, it works pretty well. So, where would you really use these two? In my opinion, the G13 Incendiary Impact is probably better, just because you can direct the fire exactly where you want it, and it can be used as kind of a problem solver, like a quick think fast chuckle nuts grenade against bugs and voteless, and even theoretically against the bots, especially if they're lightly armored or even medium armored. The big thing about these is if you have the chainsaw boys, the Ravagers, or if you have a whole bunch of sentry Centurions or Devastators close to each other, throwing the incendiary grenades isn't a terrible idea, especially with the AP3. So, not bad grenades by any means whatsoever, but definitely more useful against the bugs than they are against other factions. And in my opinion, impact grenades that have fire are better than kinetic grenades that have fire. The next one is the GP6 or the G6 frag. It is AP3 with its fragments, and it is a roller. It's kind of the classic Helldiver grenade. It's really most analogous to something like a crack grenade, except instead of being directed or like shaped charge, it's just a fragmentation bomb. Important note: this thing does roll, and it likes to bounce quite a bit. So, be careful of that. I've thrown these things uphill and then had them roll back on me. They have a relatively long fuse, in my opinion, but it's not nearly as long as the next one, which is the G12 High Explosive, which is right here. This kind of jacketed red grenade that looks like it should be a smoke grenade, but it isn't. It's very high explosive. It's a pretty fat, heavy grenade. It is AP4 for that reason, but I have noticed a real problem with the G12. Apart from being AP4, and by the way, the AP4 part of it is only if it's basically touching the target. It is not AP4 if it explodes and hits them with an AoE. It barely has any fragmentation. You essentially need to be touching the target with the explosive in order for it to penetrate armor level 4. So apart from that issue where you basically have to throw it onto the backs of tanks or, touch something with it, or it has a very small AP4 radius, it also has a very long fuse, and in my opinion, this kind of draws against its overall usefulness. That combination of a very small, high damage radius and a long fuse makes it kind of hard, in my opinion, to actually land in the place where you want it to land. Now, is that a total mark against it? No, not necessarily. You do, if I remember right, get an extra grenade with it, which is nice, and extra grenades are always fine and dandy, especially for clearing out areas. But I think that, honestly, it's a toss-up between whether you like the frag for its, wider damage radius, or whether you want to gamble on the AP4 having its much smaller radius. And then, of course, you have their stunted little cousin that likes to kill you a lot, the G16 Impact. It is AP4, but, prompt, quick, in a hurry, and in the enemy's face. This does mean that it could be used for a lot of different enemies, including Hulks. However, important however, you have a high chance of killing yourself. I have seen a lot of people throw the G16 and just die instantly because the fragmentation pattern is wide. So you want to almost treat it like a G6 that you throw at the enemy instead of like at their feet. You definitely don't want to throw it at your own feet unless you want to meet democracy face to face. So yeah, it's not bad. I see a lot of people using it, kind of like another kind of think fast chuckle nuts grenade. It's like enemy right up in front of me, toss it. The difference between it and the incendiary impact is it'll kill you without a second's hesitation. So careful out there, Helldivers, because it likes to murder you. The next ones are kind of these specialist grenades before we get to one of my favorite grenades. The G23 Stun Grenade. It's this one in the middle, kind of a classic flashbang looking grenade with some fancy little triangular louvres in the side. Now, the G23 Stun is listed as AP3. That doesn't mean that it damages AP3 targets or anti-tank things. It's not really a tank weapon, so to speak. But it affects, quote-unquote, tanks. So basically, it has the ability to stun anything with an armor level of 6. So, Chargers, yes. Hulks, yes. Some of the lighter tanks, yes. And this stun effect is actually pretty brutal, all in all. Again, it can do a little bit of damage if it falls directly on something, but the real reason that you'd use the G23 is essentially to stop a large or a very important group of targets or single target from charging at you. That kind of indicates what it's used for. Chargers. That's really the biggest reason to use the G23 stun, is if there are enemy chargers or maybe some angry Hulks running at you, the G23 stun could pretty effectively shut them down and cause them to stop, giving you a chance to switch to an armor-penetrating weapon and destroy them, or just run away. Again, I'm not a big fan of utility grenades as much as I am of, like, the correct type of damage that grenades should be doing. So the stun, it's not for me, but I definitely understand why it is more used than something like the smoke grenade. The next one is a little bit of another oddment here. It's got this kind of chemical canister grenade here, and it is the G4 gas grenade, and it affects, again, quote unquote, tanks up to AP6. So this can affect chargers. It can affect basically every single bug, I think, barring the Bile Titan. So what are the gas effects in Helldivers 2? Well, it does a couple of things. There are certain versions of it that make them go crazy, but most of them are a little bit like a mix of confusion and panic and smoke. So it does a lot of good things to bugs, and it causes them to freak out. Occasionally it makes them kill each other. I'm not sure how consistent that is, because I don't use the gas weapons all that much, but I know that with the Sterilizer and the Bad Breath Guard Dog, it can make them attack each other by accident. So it's really only useful against bugs. Against every other faction, it basically acts as, like, tear gas plus smoke. So it can bother them, stun them, slow them down, distract them, cause them to lose line of sight occasionally, but against anything but the bugs, I'm not sure it has the same exact effect. The next one is a complete gimmick grenade, and it's the G3 smoke. The G3 smoke grenade, which I don't even have pictured here because it is 100% just a gimmick grenade, is the smallest smoke effect in the game, and it really only works to break line of sight. There are very specific scenarios in which you need to throw up a smoke grenade. Basically, you're getting shot at by something, or you are really close to death. Against the bugs, I'm not even sure that the G3 will even work. You need to basically be inside of the smoke, or they need to be inside of the smoke, and then you need to effectively stealth away, meaning you can't be wearing heavy armor, and you can't really run. That relies on a lot of things, and while smoke could be useful in the offensive, maybe to slow enemies down, keep them from converging on you, I still don't see the advantage of it over a normal grenade, or even the stun grenades. Even the stun grenades or the smoke grenades would be better against bugs and against bots in most situations, in my opinion. So, in my opinion, it's just a gimmick grenade. Maybe if you were running like a full smoke loadout for some reason, like a challenge or something of the sort, but I would never use it if I was being serious. The next one is a bit of a flying meme, the G50 Seeker. It is flying armor penetration 4, and you can have multiple of them kind of droning around your head. Now, you can throw up to 4 of these, and they basically sit around and drone until they find a nearby target. The other funny thing is you can actually throw them at gunships and other flying enemies, and they will run at them like an angry suicide drone and explode. Now, the GP50 is really good, and honestly, out of every single grenade, it is my number 2. For a couple of reasons. 1, armor penetration 4, hell yes. 2, it basically can't miss. Even if you miss, it still just floats around your head, so great option there. However, it does run out of, juice. It does fall out of the sky, or just try and run towards the closest enemy target and then explode. So you need to be a little bit smart with how you use it, but I definitely see the appeal over almost every other grenade. Especially over the annoying dichotomy of like the G6 frag and the G12 high explosive. I definitely see the G50 Seeker's appeal, and even while I do call it a meme, that doesn't mean that it's a bad meme. The next one is the G123 Thermite. The Termite, the throw and forget. This is my favorite grenade. I love the Thermite so much. Now, it does have some downsides, but it's an AP7, and oh my goodness, you feel all 7 of those APs. There is not a single grenade that does as much damage, as consistently, to every single armored enemy in the game as the G123 Thermite. I call it the Termite because it drills through my enemies. I call it the throw and forget because if I'm fighting bugs, I throw a bunch of them and they go off like landmine fireworks. And I call it the feel all 7 because, my goodness, there's not a single tank in the game that the G123 Thermite doesn't work well against. Essentially what happens is it spikes in your hand, you throw it at a target. It works a little bit like a stick grenade, so you can miss. There's a little bit of art or RNG to it, but if it touches the target with the top head of the weapon, it essentially sticks to it instantly, starts burning at a very high temperature, melts through the armor, and then explodes, doing a lot of damage. Basically, I think it's one of the highest damage grenades in the game, if not the highest. And it has far and away more penetration than any other grenade in the game. The reason that I like this so much is its versatility. Apart from the funny, stupid, like, haha, it can bounce off targets, or it's not very good against bugs and it kind of burns out and explodes on the ground like fireworks, it is so good at giving you an alternative anti-tank weapon. Chargers, no problem. Throw 2, Charger's dead. Hulks, 1 to the face, you can just walk away, that Charger's guaranteed to die. Bile Titans, Striders, any tank in the arsenal, 1, 2, 3, run away and hide. Guaranteed it's either dead or severely wounded. My favorite combination, my absolute favorite combination, is when you have 3 of these and you're facing a Bile Titan, or multiple Bile Titans. Because what you do is you get at a good range with the Bile Titan, you toss 1, 2, 3 thermites, and then you send 1 GP31 ultimatum shot at it, or at the next one in line, boom, 2 Bile Titans instantly dead, and you've expended exactly 0 ammunition from your primary weapon or any anti-tank weapons that you may have. The Thermite is such a good kind of pocket AT weapon, and it broadly widens the options for the player. You can bring in other anti-tank weapons to make yourself a specialist the way that I do. So I bring in the ultimatum, obviously, and I also bring in the recoilless rifle. So in effect, I can kill more tanks without having to reload than most other full loadouts. In addition, the Thermite gives you an option right out of spawn to kill enemy tanks, and this is super helpful against Bile Titans and against tanks and other things of that nature. It doesn't work well against the Illuminate. That's the one thing I will complain, it doesn't do well against the Illuminate. But that's the only faction that it doesn't do well against. And even against them, you can find some uses. You can stick it to enemy structures and targets. You can also knock down the shields on the tripods and stick it to them. So, I love the Thermite. But what is best against each faction? So, against the bots, Thermite. Thermite is the best, with the GP50 Seeker being the second up. The Seeker is great because it can take out flyers, and it's also great because you can carry them around and essentially first strike a whole bunch of different armored enemies. The Thermite is great because, like we talked about, you can take out multiple tanks without any use of ammunition straight out of your Hellpod. But what about bugs? Well, for the bugs, the Thermite isn't bad, but I do think that there are 2 that are slightly better. The first one is the G23 Stun. Now again, I talked a little bit of crap about this one, but I'm not going to lie, it's not terrible because it can stun a lot of different dangerous enemies, like Chargers and like Stalkers. And if you carry around a shotgun, I could definitely see why you use the G23 for its stun rounds, so that you can choose your targets wisely and blow their head off with a 12 gauge. Reasonable. The other one would be the gas grenade for bugs, obviously because gas works primo against bugs. Then for the Illuminate. What would I say for the Illuminate? I think the best possible option is the G13 Incendiary Impact, or the classic Impact Grenade, or the Seeker. Scratch the Impact Grenade. I think it's just the Incendiary Impact and the Seeker. The Seeker is good for flying enemies, and also theoretically for the tripods or overseers. And then against every other enemy, including the overseers or the guardians, the impact incendiary works just perfectly. It's great for clearing out the voteless. It's perfectly reasonable to just splash one of the overseers in the face with a Molotov cocktail at point blank range. If you can land one on one of the flyers, sometimes they fly quite low to the ground, so that's not unreasonable. But other than that, I would say the Seeker is the best anti-illuminate weapon of the bunch. So, that is the end of our small arms. My goodness, it's been a busy one. We're going to have a lot more stuff coming up. But like I said, my computer's in the shop, so we're going to be doing quite a few videos in this manner for a little bit now. Again, when I get back to it, we'll have more streams, more variety of videos, and more things just coming up on the channel in general. But the next one in our options, we have support weapons next, so essentially stratagem weapons, and then I'll go down the green line and the red line of stratagems. So I'll do 3 different stratagem videos for the different options that we have currently in-game. With that said, I wish you all a lovely good night.